So I'm supposed to mention that this talk may include adult language, starting with the title, How Continuous Delivery and Lean Management Make Your DevOps Amazeballs. This is based on some of the work in the 2015 State of DevOps study that was sponsored by Puppet Labs and IT Revolution Press. So for a quick recap, if any of you are familiar with some of the work, let me recap a little bit. There's a talk I did in 2014 called DevOps and the Bottom Line. And I spoke about the work done in the 2014 Puppet Lab State of DevOps study. And it found a link between IT performance, the work we see in DevOps, and how it found a link between IT investments and IT performance and organizational performance for the very first time. And that was groundbreaking. It was totally revolutionary because for years and years and years, IT was always seen as a cost center, right? And I'm starting to see some heads nod in the audience. And we know this. And so I came out of academia, but I was also a sysadmin for years, right? And I was also in hardware for a really long time. It was like we were always sitting down in a corner in a basement, somewhere dusty, laying cable, and it was like we were always an expense, right? And it was in part because organizations had to spend money on us, but we were never an advantage, right? We were what was considered a point of parity. They had to spend money on tech, but we were never a point of distinction. Technology was never a way they could get ahead or stay ahead, right? We were never a competitive advantage or a sustainable competitive advantage. Well, then DevOps came along, and they realized that if you do technology in ways that are different, and this difference is it has to be technology and practice and process and culture, right? So you can't just treat your technology people as a commodity, right? You can't just keep outsourcing us. You can't just stick us in a corner and let us have this awful culture. You have to treat us as one of the team. You have to let us integrate with the dev crowd, right? Let us help them understand that the code that they write needs to be scalable. Once we're integrated in fully integrated ways where we have empathy for one another, where we each contribute to all of the teams, suddenly technology makes a really, really big impact to the bottom line in organizations. Okay, so that's where DevOps hits the bottom line. So that was last year. So 1 year later, what does the 2015 study say? So here's the deets, right? So in 2015, there were about 5,000 respondents. In 2014, there were about 9,300 respondents. So the response size was smaller, totally fine. From a statistical point of view, it's fine. It's still really, really big. From an academic point of view, from a statistical power point of view, given the types of analyses that we did, we only needed about 200 responses to get this done, so we totally surpassed that. Lots of analyses were done to make sure that there weren't problems in the data or concerns in the data regarding any kind of biases, so those were handled. There were, again, 3 groups of IT performers: high, medium, and low. So the data was taken and it was analyzed. A cluster analysis was performed. So basically, given the 3, so in the 2014 data set, there were variables that were taken to describe IT performance. And IT performance for most software delivery shops or web ops shops are mean time to restore, right? So you want some sort of stability metric. Change fail rate, which is another stability metric. For throughput metrics, there was deploy frequency and also throughput. So when you take those and you do a cluster analysis, you end up having 3 very, very distinct groups. A cluster analysis says, we're going to take these variables, we're going to let them classify and categorize groups, and they end up clustering. Right? So the ones that are very, very similar to each other end up in a group, and they also end up being very dissimilar from others. They end up in kind of 3-dimensional space into 3 very distinct groups. We're super creative. We call them high, medium, and low. They actually end up being, the crazy thing is that all of those variables I just mentioned end up hanging out all together in very similar ways, with like high performers doing everything really well in statistically similar ways, low performers doing everything like really sucky in really statistically significant ways, medium performers like hanging out in the middle in really statistically significant ways. This is the same thing that was found in 2014. So validating those findings was awesome. Okay, for those playing statistics bingo, correlation, common method variance, making sure that like there's no problem with the fact that most of the data was collected using surveys. So there's like a whole lot of stuff that was done there to make sure that wasn't a problem. This year we used partial least squares, which is a super cool statistics method, which I'll talk about. Structured equation modeling, which was also super fun. Exploratory factor analysis using varimax rotation. Cutting off at eigenvalues of 1. There's also factors and constructs. If you want to dig into more details on this, you can take a look at the Velocity conference presentation from last year in Santa Clara. Okay, so again, to recap what was found last year, and do we see it again this year? DevOps is good for business. IT performance is predictive of organizational performance, bottom line performance, okay? This is awesome. Here's what we see. High-performing IT organizations, this cluster analysis, right? When we compare high IT performing organizations to low IT performing organizations, we see they are twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals. So for those of you who want to like take a look at the State of DevOps report, or if you're trying to get some type of excuse to like convince your organization to invest in IT, take this report and say, here, I can show you, I now have like really, really good evidence that investing in IT is good for the business. And by the way, we're hearing back from a lot of people that this report, both your reports, is helping people get buy-in and investment in IT now. So here you go. Also, there's a little asterisk here. We see 50% higher market cap growth over 3 years. There's an asterisk because that required a stock ticker symbol. So for people who volunteered the stock ticker symbol, so you had to be big enough, you had to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So like disclaimer, disclaimer. But for anyone who had that, who met that criteria, for the previous 3 years, there was a 50% higher market cap growth over 3 years. So that's a huge hurdle, okay? That's awesome. We also ran that through like hedge fund managers. They confirmed it. Can beat the market. I can't quite clear transaction costs, but that's huge. Okay, so DevOps is good for IT performance. I mentioned this previously. I mentioned these variables. Here's your slide. It is measured by agility and reliability. So agility or throughput, right? How fast you can pivot, how quickly you can get features through the system. This is part dev, this is part ops. We have a big role in this, okay? Deployment frequency and lead time. Now, the interesting thing, the Agile crowd's like, we've been doing this for years. No, Agile goes up until operations. We play a major role in this, okay? We're the crowd here. Reliability, MTTR and change fail rate. Change fail rate has a little asterisk there. It's important to, we think it's important to include. We talk about it. It's not a major classifier. Statistically, it doesn't help us like classify, but we track it because we think it's interesting. It's not a classifier, but it is still statistically different among the 3 groups, okay? Here's what we see. High IT performers versus low IT performers, okay? When I compare like the very distinct groups, high versus low, we see 30 times more frequent deployments in both 2014 and 2015, and 200 times faster lead times than their peers. That is code commit to code deploy. That's like huge, right? So what does that mean for your organization? So when you think about this, what does this mean when you're trying to convince someone in your organization? Is this faster to market? Is this value delivery? Is this a vulnerability that you need to address and you need to get out? Is this compliance and regulatory changes that you need to be able to get out and release to your code? This is big, okay? There are a lot of things this can mean. This is also better reliability. Now, in 2014, in terms of faster MTTR, we saw 48x. In 2015, that jumped to 168x. So we think companies already have great business ability to be able to push code. If they can do it every couple hours, do they really need to be able to do it every couple minutes? Maybe not, because they don't see a business need. But in terms of reliability, they weren't quite there, so they really doubled down. Faster MTTR. We also saw huge improvements in change success rate. They went from 3x to 60x. When you introduce these changes in your code, when you deploy your code, you're seeing much smaller changes. Failing fast and learning quickly isn't a problem, because you just push up new code. It's fine. Again, what does that mean for your business? What does it cost your business in downtime? Either from actual cost of downtime or even from reputational concerns. This is a big value add for companies now. So, this is from last year's study. Key factors that correlated with each component. So do we know what correlation is? As one thing moves, the other thing moves. So correlation isn't causation, or one doesn't predict the other. So prediction and correlation are a little different. But so last year really focused on correlation. Here's something that's interesting. As you look at MTTR, lead time for changes, deployment frequency, version control for all your production artifacts was highly correlated with every single one of those things. So use of version control is a big deal here. Okay? Use of monitoring, automated testing, continuous delivery also shows up throughout there. Things that are also super important, culture, I've got an asterisk there because that was actually predictive of both IT performance and organizational performance. So we already knew culture was going to be a big deal. Job satisfaction, a climate for learning. So we're seeing the things that are showing up in DevOps, right? So we're seeing tooling, we're seeing practice and process, we're seeing culture. But we wanted to know what drives IT performance. And by drive, I meant predict. We really wanted to get into the prediction here. So now we figured out what does IT performance mean. We needed to have a pretty good definition so that we could research it, right? So we all kind of have, there are a few different definitions for this, but for me to be able to research it and study it and talk about it, we needed to have a good definition. So now I do, right? So I know it's MTTR, deploy frequency, lead time for changes. I wanted to know what drives IT performance. So I have step 1, what's IT performance? Step 2, what drives IT performance? Who knows step 3? Profit. Come on. I have underpants gnomes. Thank you. Thank you. It's not just profit. Okay. So what drives IT performance? Based on some of the things that were highly correlated but not necessarily predictive from the previous year, we noticed a few themes, right? You noticed that there was some version control, there was continuous delivery, some continuous integration type of things. There were WIP limits. So we looked at continuous delivery. And we actually broke it down. And you can see this in the 2015 State of DevOps report. Continuous delivery is predictive of IT performance, and it is comprised of these key things. The things that form up continuous delivery, or the things that we investigated and the things that make up continuous delivery, test deployment and automation, continuous integration, and having all production artifacts in version control. Now, this also applies to IT operations. Right? These things we can also do with infrastructure. When we say all production artifacts in version control, this was also having our configuration management systems in version control. This was also having our test deployment and automation. It's really great that we can put many of our declarative configuration management systems, we can test to them. If there's a question, can you go to the mic?
I can speak loudly.
Well, except then it won't get picked up on the video. There's a mic in the aisle.
When you say production artifacts, are you talking about the things that are built or just the source code?
So production artifacts, the study specifically looked at, off the top of my head, I know it was 4 things. It was configuration management systems, application code, source code, and I know there was one more thing, and I can't think of it right now off the top of my head. But it was all of the coding type of artifacts that you have. But it included configuration management code, application code, source code. I'm missing one, I'm sorry. It is in the report, though. Okay. And if you do, I know you can do a quick Google, but like for 2015 Puppet Labs State of DevOps Report, you can get that, and it has the details in that. So these things make up continuous delivery. Continuous delivery is predictive of IT performance and lower change fail rates, which is a great finding. So now we know what types of things make our work better. So continuous delivery makes our work better. Another thing that was a great finding, because making our work better is good. Do you know what's better? Well, first, let's have a quote. Sorry. So Yahoo, product owner for Yahoo Chef implementation. We never had testability before. We have it now. We have this experience, and we know this stuff is working, and it's working with controls. They had automation, configuration, and deployment of 250,000 nodes. They can patch their entire infrastructure within 6 hours of a patch being made available. How's that for making your IT performance work better and faster? Better and faster, and they have testability. Okay? So, what makes your work better? It makes it feel better. We also captured deploy pain. Because we know that there are times, and we know this, right? Like the whole, I don't want to even say anecdotal, like we know this. Anyone who's been in the field for a few years knows the whole like Friday at 5 or whenever like the dev team has their handoff, their massive milestone or their deadline, or they have their regular deploy cycle, and they hand it off, and then we stress or we panic, the build is done, and now we have to try to put it into production. And it doesn't feel good. We can't even always plan vacation because we don't know when it's coming, and when it does come, like we have 12-hour days because we have to find a way to make it work. When you're doing continuous delivery in really good ways, made up of these components, deploy pain goes down. And it goes down for everyone in the chain, but especially for the ops team. Deployments are not feared. Deployments are not, we don't worry about them. This is a smooth process. So, and then this carries all the way through. By the way, so this was done in a statistical analysis called PLS. These arrows are fully predictive. So you can read this like a regression model. So this is currently under, there's also a version of this under peer review right now. So like these little arrows have coefficients and betas, and the little boxes, like org performance and IT performance, actually have R-squares. So this is a fully predictive model, which is great, right? This is a cool finding. So this is continuous delivery. Now, we wanted to see what else drives IT performance. So we looked at one more thing. We also looked at lean management, because it's not just automation and tooling, it's also practice and process, okay? So what makes up lean management in the context of the work that we do? So WIP limits that drive improvement. Historically, we suck at this, okay? WIP limits are a really good thing, okay? So like actually try to find a way to limit the work that we do, because otherwise we will die of the WIP apocalypse. That's like my favorite Jane Kim word. Use of visualizations to monitor our work, see what we're doing. Also monitoring to make business decisions. I actually added italics there because it's not just monitoring to page us and wake us up in the middle of the night. We need to be monitoring our systems to make business decisions. So these types of things combine to make up some lean management processes. Now, I gave a version of this presentation the other night, and John Willis pointed out, I left out safety. So this next year, we'll probably be adding some more things around other types of really good lean management practices like safety. But lean management here is predictive, again, of IT performance. Now, Etsy is really, really fantastic about this, right? They've got rooms with banks of monitors, and they use what they call vertical line technology. And Micro and Betsy has said, if it moves, graph it. So they've got all these graphs, they have all these visualizations, and all of these vertical lines you see show up when you push something into production. They're different colors based on different types of things that you push. If you push something, you're expected to go take a look at the graph. If something happens to that graph that isn't expected, then you go back and you fix it. So this is the use of visualizations to make business decisions, to understand what you've done. I think this is a great example of that. So lean management is something else that makes our work better and makes it feel better. This was something that was really, really interesting. So this did two things. It improved that organizational culture that showed up last year, and it decreased feelings of burnout. So we know that burnout is a significant issue in our industry and in our field. Okay? Use of lean management practices, these WIP limits, these visualizations to monitor our work, and the monitoring to make business decisions, decreases feelings of burnout. So again, we're getting a twofer here. We're making our work better, and we're making it feel better. Here's a great example from Turner Sports. Julia Wester was a development manager, and she said, I was chatting with her, she said, I was trying to figure out why my team was working themselves to death, but not getting anything done. By implementing WIP limits, we were able to focus on our work. Finishing work feels better than sprinting and feeling like a hero in the moment, because that's only a moment. Carrying the analysis all the way through, that organizational culture is really a huge winner here, because it contributes to IT performance and to organizational performance. So we see that all the way through. So we know now that DevOps drives IT and organizational performance. Again, we see tooling and automation, practice and process, and our culture. So with our tooling and automation, we were able to back this out into the continuous delivery and the aspects of that that are important. Practice and process, we see those lean management principles and what makes that up. With culture, we see high trust and information flow. With the Western culture pieces there, it breaks down into about 3 different types. There's kind of a low trust culture, which is called power-oriented culture. It's very pathological. The one in the middle is bureaucratic culture, which is a rule-oriented culture. The high-trust culture is a high-performance culture, I'm trying to think of another word, a generative culture. And the way we see that break down is about 50% of respondents tend to end up in the middle one in the bureaucratic culture. But there is always a statistically significant difference between the high IT performers, medium IT performers, and the low IT performers in those cultures. Now, if anyone is interested in DevOps benchmarking, the team that brought you the Puppet Lab State of DevOps report, you can benchmark your performance across 4 axes. Right now we have culture, automation, process, metrics, and measurement. You can compare your own IT performance against industry benchmarking standards and get a personalized report with results that you share. If you would like to receive an invite to the DevOps benchmarking tool, chance for a personalized analysis, if you'd like a copy of the presentation, or, and also a metrics guidance white paper, you can shoot me an email at nicolefv@sendyourslides.com with the subject of DevOps. And I have time for questions regarding any of the methodology or any of the findings. And if you can come up to the mic. And there's also a traveling mic.
So, all right. So, I've seen situations with.
Sorry, can you speak into the
sure.
mic? Thank you.
I've seen situations like nonprofits or maybe organizations that don't have any technical people on staff working with contractors
Okay.
that don't have these right? So
That
they'll
don't have what?
don't have like the best practices or version control, and they'll end up paying like tens of millions of dollars for a site that has no history, right? So I'm wondering like if you have any thoughts of how to bridge that gap, right? So that, because it's, if they don't have people on staff that already know that these are important, right? How do you sort of communicate that?
Which things are, I'm
So
not,
I guess the real question
I just want to
is-
make sure I understand the question.
Yep. So the real question is, for an organization with no technical staff working with a contractor that doesn't have this, how do you kind of bridge that gap and communicate?
And
that
communicate
this
to
is-
them
that these are important and expected, and
that these processes are important and these practices are important. I think right now it can be, in part the conversation can be, at this point, basically every type of organization, every type of business is going to be a software business. And so if you want to deliver value or if you want to deliver efficiency in some way, it's going to be really important to use good practices and good processes, either to deliver value and efficiency to your customers or to your clients or to, even if you're in a nonprofit, you have someone that you serve. So you can do that in the most cost-efficient way, or you can do it in the way that makes the most money, or if you're a nonprofit, we want to do it in the way that serves our customers best or our clients best or in the most efficient way. And sometimes you can even call in, because this harkens back, much of this harkens back to lean principles, and you can say, we know this from lean accounting, we know this from lean manufacturing, we want to do this in ways that are highly reliable, highly secure. It can be a little bit tricky with integrating contractors if they don't care about following any of those processes, but also sometimes with contractors you can dictate that these are the things that are very important, and sometimes that can help as well.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi.
Hi. So I was wondering if you had any advice for, so I'm in an organization that is kind of unfortunately going for ITIL.
Yes.
And like how to sell these sort of, ITIL is kind of the anti-DevOps in some ways, or at least it tends to encourage practices that are not very DevOps compatible, and like how to encourage an organization that's starting to go for ITIL to not go for the anti-DevOps parts of it.
So sometimes the challenge with ITIL is that it's very, very regimented with a whole lot of handoffs and a whole lot of approvals and like a whole lot of change approval boards, right?
Yeah, we have the change approval committee that only meets twice a week, that anything major has to go through them. Yeah,
so one way to, so there are a lot of different ways that I've seen organizations get around that. Sometimes you can invite or involve someone from those committees to get involved with, so you have WIP limits, right? So involve someone on that committee in writing up items for your Kanban board or for your WIP board, so that you have 2 weeks worth of work for the group to pull off the Kanban board and go through the process, and that way they've kind of approved the work that's going to be done, or they've seen the work that's going to be done. Sometimes you can use them for, so change approval boards, we found in the 2014 study that change approval boards used in the traditional sense or in the not great sense. So it's funny because when I point this out to ITIL, they get either super angry or super defensive, like that's not the way change approval boards are meant. So who here's ever like written a thing and like said like this is perfect, like it's never gonna break? Like this is never gonna break, and then it breaks, right? So who is best to be approving changes or reviewing changes, right? People who are close to the work. Someone on some kind of change approval board or committee is generally a couple layers removed from that. Even if they've done something like that before, it's probably been a few years ago, so peer review is really, really good. The thing that change approval boards or committees end up being really, really good at is notification, right? So they end up seeing something and they're like actually not good at approving something. Sometimes they inadvertently end up introducing error into the process. But what they end up being really good at is saying, oh, I saw this change happening. By the way, like umbrella notification to the rest of the org. Here's what I'm going to do. So sometimes you can suggest, like, you can find ways so that what they end up doing is helping to notify other parties around the organization. So that can be helpful. But yeah, finding ways to make sure that you can really iterate quickly, involving them really, really early in the process can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of good things about the way that we're currently doing ITIL is that our change advisory board actually just has representatives from several of the groups, including our system administration team.
Oh, that's good.
So there's someone that represents us on the board. And also that we've been able to do, they do recurring change approvals where you say, this is something we do a lot, so we'd like approval to just keep doing this a lot.
Oh, that's good.
And that, so it's not as bad as it could be, but I don't want it to get any farther.
Yeah,
farther
and
towards the
sometimes I
bad
see
part of
like
ITIL.
change approval boards, like you were saying, like we do this a lot, can we just keep doing it? So that's a huge step in the right direction.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll grab the proper one here. So one of the things that sysadmins often have trouble with is visibility. Couple
Yes.
that with the fact that we generally don't know how to talk to management very well. We end up being our own worst enemies. If we're doing our job properly, nobody sees us. We don't need to talk to management. If we're doing our job, poorly, well, things change. What I love here is that you actually have numbers that show all the things that we've experienced and felt anecdotally for the past 30 years. How can we take these to our management and not get excluded from the conversation? Right? We can hand them numbers that a manager will look at and say, okay, great, 30 times improvement. And then they'll suddenly go off and be doing management-y things, and we're kind of no better off. Have you got any suggestions on how we could perhaps avoid that and stay involved?
Yes. So some of these numbers are great as a way to start the conversation or to say, here's why investment IT, continued investment in IT or more investment in IT is worth it to you. This is now an investment, and it's not just something that you have to spend because I have to keep up with someone. And you can see now that ops is a really big piece of it, right? Because for years, development was considered R&D, right? Research and development. Software engineering was development. So this was like the new fun, sexy rock stars out front. And IT ops was like, we were in the back, like backstage, we were fun. No, like DevOps, you cannot do without ops. And so you can like bring some of these numbers to the forefront and say, we are a key component of this. This is important, this is relevant. You'll notice that IT performance has aspects of both throughput, which is, change and introducing change. Like we know that dev and ops traditionally have competing forces, but you can point out that the IT performance metric is comprised of both throughput and agility and stability. You cannot do this without us. Help me make the entire organization better. Let me help you with this, because I know how to help the development code be scalable. I know how to help you deliver value to your customers. I know how to help you do this. And here's all the numbers to prove it. And by the way, so many organizations are doing this. It's not just like the Etsy's and the Amazons and the unicorns, if you guys are familiar with that term. It's not just the little startups that so many enterprises have said, oh, that's not us anymore. So many organizations are undergoing transformations. They finally figured out we need to be involving everyone. And I think these types of numbers and reports are now empowering people to say, we have to involve the entire value chain. We can't just do the slow ITIL way. We can't just do Agile, because Agile actually does. It stops at the change approval board before the ops team.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines, one of the things I like about the report is that anecdotes is not the plural of data.
Yes.
But I'm a little confused by the model.
Okay.
It seems that there are confounding factors in some of the parts of the analysis.
Okay.
For example, CI is dependent upon version control. If you don't have version control, you can't have CI.
No, it's not dependent upon. It is, sorry,
It's a
can you
prerequisite.
restate? Let me make sure.
You can't do CI unless you have a way of having version control that people can integrate their code in a single build environment.
Let me back up. So if I go to here, continuous delivery. Oh,
Right.
okay, so for continuous delivery, so this is not, we're acknowledging the fact that there may be interdependencies among the things on the left. All we are saying is that to have a continuous delivery, when you have continuous delivery, it is formed up of the things on the left.
Well, it seems also that WIP is involved in that too. That is because you want to be able to deliver small units so you can deliver them quickly.
Likely, but that was not, so research note, when you test something to be in a predictive model, you must meet one of three conditions. Those three conditions are longitudinal data collection, data analysis, which I did not have here. This was a cross-sectional one data collection point and study, so I did not have that. The second one would be a fully randomized data collection, which I did not have. The third one is you must have theory, like it must be a model that is predicted by theory and expertise and all those types of things. So while we can say that like WIP is likely, like it kind of makes sense that WIP is a part of that, it's not necessarily a fundamental aspect of what continuous delivery is. It does make sense, but that's not a fundamental piece of it. WIP was broken out to be part of lean management practices, which is why those two things are broken out.
Martin Fowler may disagree with you on that, but that's
Yes, yeah. So, but that's why you have to be really careful in statistics and research, because once you just start fishing for data and fishing for relationships, it can cause some problems.
Do you have any insights on the relative contributive factor of these things on the left?
I do. Those numbers were not published in the State of DevOps report, and so by NDA, I cannot release those right now. But that is under peer review. So
Okay.
Once that peer review comes out, or a working paper right now is available on SSRN, Social Science Research Network, and so those betas are under peer review. The final peer review has not been accepted, but those are.
Then I may be less confused by the model. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry, Nicole, just quickly, can we mail you to get a notification when that's published?
Yes,
Cool.
absolutely. Please feel free to mail me. And that's Nicole@chef.io or NicoleFV@gmail.com.
I hope I don't make you laugh with this question, but was networking included in any of this, or was this all servers? When they did,
Define questions
were
about
the
networking.
networking, so were the routers and switches involved? Were the people who responded to this, were they talking about the DevOps model for just the compute part of it or the storage part of it, or were they also talking about they were deploying DevOps for their networking pieces, all the routers and switches that they deploy?
So the survey, the sample size was around 5,000 people, 4,900. So yeah, there were people that had roles throughout the organization. Was that your question? So yeah, I mean, we had networking admins in there. We had.
So you did have networking admins in there?
Oh yes.
Okay, networking admins who did traditional router switches work as well.
Yes.
Thanks.
And those demographics are outlined in detail in the 2015 report. There is a page that has what roles were covered.
So I just have a couple comments.
Sure.
We're a puppet shop, and a few years ago we implemented essentially everything that's on the left there for our infrastructure. I'm in the ops group. Development was tossing apps to us over the wall. I started to just work with the developers and got them on board to start using the same tools that we were using. and it's been fantastic.
Yay!
So I guess,
Everybody.
you know, there's a back door into implementing this in your shop if you can't get supportive management. Because once it's in there, management has now come on board.
Okay, so that's really interesting because traditionally DevOps was completely grassroots, right? It was, I don't know if you know that. By the way, traditionally DevOps was very, very grassroots. It was a few teams trying to throw this together, sometimes completely started in ops and then pulling together a few dev people. Sometimes it was dev people trying to figure out a way to keep their stuff from breaking because they're like, my code's amazing. Why doesn't it scale? Because it's like amazing on your one box because you never tried to scale it. Now that now that management is starting to see that people who like do the DevOps are making, like, they're printing cash, and now that the reports are starting to come out, now we're starting to see management support. So now we're starting to see a little bit more of this. But yeah, if you cannot convince management, absolutely.
Just do it.
Just do it, Nike. Okay, and that is my time. So if you have any other questions for me, please feel free to find me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole.